everybody. It's Matt from the Dan and Matt Show, aka Today New Brunswick, Tomorrow the World, episode number 14. And we're on our, I think it's at this point, our 10-month almost anniversary. So we've been
just about.
Yeah, I thought maybe that we started it earlier last fall than we actually did, because when I just kind of look back on the timeline or whatever, it was like the first episode didn't come out until like early December, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, so it was something like that. But we'd at least been in talks for
about a year. We give ourselves lots of latitude here to take lots of time away and shift things around without any guilt or compunctions, which I don't know, man. I don't get that in a lot of other areas in my life, so I appreciate that aspect of this year podcast thingy. So
yeah.
Anyway, why don't you tell us what the topic's about, man? Because I'll be danged, I wrote my notes, and this is like not bragging, but it kind of is. I wrote my notes like right after the last episode came out, so 2.5 weeks ago, whatever it was. This is like, why don't you tell us about what the topic is here now?
All right. The topic was, I chose the topic late to the party, and I took it as artists that like I've been, I ended up being aware of for a while before I actually checked them out, or sort of hopped in at a later point of their career and didn't realize how late a point of the career it actually was. And sort of with that time sort of occurring when I would have, could have been listening to them, but, for whatever reason, I feel like it's been it kind of falls into like something about like an early band name turned me off, or a bad review. Those seem to be the two camps that my list has kind of fallen into for the most part. That then something came up later on where I realized like, hey, wait a sec, these guys are actually good. So yeah, that's sort of how I that was the topic for this show.
That's a great idea.
The direction I took it in. Yeah. And the first of those is an artist who actually has put out one of the albums from 2023 that I've quite enjoyed, and that is Jeff Rosenstock, who I don't know if you're familiar with.
Wow.
Yeah, and the reason I picked Jeff Rosenstock is because I guess I've kind of been on board for the majority of his solo career, but he had almost 20 years of music before that, between his previous bands, The Arrogant Sons of Bitches and Bomb the Music Industry, both of whom were bands that I, for whatever reason, I just like, I think I heard like folk punk inspired ska, and just at the time, that was not the flavor combo that my musical palette was looking for. So I just think Bomb the Music Industry were just something I never really, and the names, I think at the time, like, when I first sort of would have become aware of them around that like late 90s, early aughts kind of era, like, that was I don't know. I wasn't looking to get in on the ground floor of something called Bomb the Music Industry at the time, especially with that, the description of, sort of like folky ska punk sort of that was put along with it, that and I realized, and then sort of much later on, when I was a fan of the Chris Gethard show, in its original sort of cable access and YouTube incarnation. I don't know if you're familiar with that whole media entity.
I ought to. I feel like I ought to know about that, and I don't. So I'm sure that's making its way.
Okay. Well,
yeah.
Anyways, so Chris Gethard is a New Jersey-based stand-up comedian and writer and podcaster. He also used to have what was basically a pop punk Wayne's World on the Manhattan Neighborhood Network cable access channel, and also sort of broadcast on YouTube, which was the Chris Gethard show, which eventually he got, he did a couple seasons on like real cable in the States on like the Fuse network or something. But the original YouTube and like cable access incarnation is just something like it's I don't think we'll ever get something like that again. It was basically like, it was like a weekly talk show where one week they might have an up and coming independent wrestler come on and teach everyone how to cut a promo. And one week, Will Ferrell might show up drunk and give people haircuts on stage, while like, you know, people from the local improv school are just kind of like having banter. And then they would have a musical guest every week that was usually kind of the creme de la creme of like a certain, like Mikey Erg was in their house band, like from the Ergs and like a bunch of other, you know, pretty big bands of the time. So that kind of like sets the vibe of what the show was. And anyways, on a pretty memorable episode that mostly because it ended up being completely derailed by the crowd chanting "Eat more butts" for the first 15 minutes of the show, which is inspired by a bit on Gethard's his debut stand-up comedy album had just come out, and that was part of like sort of like the big closing bit was something about eating more butts. So the crowd decided to completely derail the next episode of his show by chanting it for 15 minutes straight, and then it led right into that week's musical guest, who I'd never heard before, who was like this great kind of like angsty pop punk rock kind of troubadour dude named Jeff Rosenstock, who played a couple songs from his debut solo album, I guess with his only release at the time, "I Smell Like Shit," which, yeah, like it's still out there and available, and it's just like a great little 10-song package of that really kind of like sets the tone of the rest of his career. And I remember hearing it and just being, then like, I think I probably listened to his music for like a year or two before cluing in, because I mean, like, I don't always, you know, I don't know everything. There's a lot going on in life, and I didn't realize that it was the dude from this band Bomb the Music Industry, that, you know, I'd been aware of for quite some time and just been like, because yeah, like for whatever reasons. And like I said, he's one of my favorite artists now. And yeah, his most recent album, Hell Mode, is really good. I think my favorite is still probably his second full-length, Worry. But yeah, just somebody that had been putting out music for, I think at that point probably a good like 15 years, and that I'd been aware of, that just I'd never checked out for whatever reason. And then, like I said, now he's one of my favorites. So that was why he was one of the first people that I had to include on my list.
Awesome. I was going to ask if I knew him from any mainstream-ish. Like, what's the most famous thing that this person was ever associated with, objectively, in terms of like?
Which person, Jeff Rosenstock or Chris Gethard?
Yes, please.
Well, Chris Gethard, I think the most mainstream thing, he's got a podcast called Beautiful Anonymous. Rosenstock. Yeah. He's got, like I said, he's been mainly a solo artist for the past like, decade.
Solo artist throughout his career. Yeah. That's like his
for this recent stage of his career. Okay. But he said previously he was in a band called Bomb the Music Industry.
Yes. So you did the whole thing about it, and I was just sort of waiting to hear from if he had something like. Okay, so
no, it's just solo. He's mostly just been releasing stuff solo. I think he's got mostly. I think this first album, I'm pretty sure he plays. It's got a drum machine, and I think he plays everything else on it. But the rest of it, he's got pretty much like
sort of.
Yeah, sort of. And it's just like, but you know, with songs about like, you know, slipping and falling on the way to the corner store. When you're
speaking of songs about slipping and falling, dude, I'm gonna jump in.
I know. Oh, yeah, winter's coming up. I'm not looking forward to that.
The Northern Boys have been on tour, and I caught just a thing about it on some stupid music thing that I follow on Instagram.
Yeah.
And I was just like, man, I know what that is because of Dan and because of that. And it's pretty righteous. So it says they're retired teachers. Is that true?
Yes.
They're all former teachers?
They're all retired teachers.
Oh my God. It makes even more sense now. Like, it's out of like fellow educators. I think I have to shout these people out, right? So
like, I believe they worked at the same school before they pursued music together.
Well, speaking of things from the UK, I guess I'll just leverage that into a transition here. And I guess probably my notes are going to be a bit different, I think, just because I grabbed certain things at hand at the time.
Yeah.
But here's something from the lovely United Kingdom. Portishead Dummy.
Ah.
Boy, oh boy. boy, oh boy, man, I don't even know. It's like I always knew that I liked this record, but it wasn't even until this past weekend where I have one of those things where, like, I'm going to bed quite late. I'm probably not going to get more than 4 hours of sleep. It's a weekend night. It's like I'm not being totally irresponsible, but I just get up and just flip this one over and just keep listening to it over perhaps an 8-hour thing of just.
Oh, that's such a good album.
Right. It was just so, and I'm just like, I don't need to go to any other record, maybe even for 12 hours. It was one of those. So, it's like, this is one of those things where, late to the party. Okay, so it's like I was aware of them because they had quite a bit of mainstream success, as I recall, back in the day, Dan, don't you?
Yes.
They were like a Much Music / MTV / whatever sensation, ish with some of their things. Yeah,
they definitely crossed over into that that like kind of the alternative end of things. Because I remember we could also get away with playing them on CHSR at the time because I definitely played them on CHSR at one point.
Well, and she's just like, and Beth, what's her name, the singer? She's just like, holy, she's like Tom Waits in kind of her intensity and what she brings to it, and she's just like, and I catch myself singing along like, I just want to be a woman.
Oh yeah.
It was like, man, she's just slaying it is what she did. And it's like, and then when I hear anything with like just whatever the like the minimalist fucking turntable with a beat beside it, I'm just like, I feel that's as close as I'm ever really gonna get to that kind of music ever. And like, I'm not about to become a house music fan. I'm not about to like just go into the whole very rich, thing about music, particularly from the UK and particularly from the 90s. Like if you look at stuff like, Train Spotting, Irvine Welsh, the Acid House, it was like a full-on cultural psychedelic movement of its own magnitude, really, in the UK. I guess probably Oasis being kind of like the most wretched kind of popular manifestation of that. But I'll just even shoehorn one last thing from the UK because to me, Leatherface, okay? And I've gone on repeatedly and I will go on repeatedly about Leatherface. So I'm necessarily just going to slide this on as a UK bullet point here. And just say that you sort of look at it, and I talk about this in the notes, if you want to look at it like late to the party compared to what. So they started in 88, then they went on until like 94, and that's when they stopped. And then they resumed again in beginning in 98. So they sort of took like a 4-year hiatus, and that's about what I attached to it. Now you could say they released the albums that they're most known for, particularly Mush, particularly Fill Your Boots, particularly. It's all friggin' canonically fucking awesome British post-hardcore rage, Husker Du plus Motorhead-ish stuff.
Exactly.
And it's just Northern England misery, and these dudes just look so friggin' gnarly and old. They look like potatoes that have been used as an ashtray, basically. And it's actually true that like 3 of the dudes who've been in that band have died now, actually. And they're not even really like old as far as getting old kind of goes. But Hard Living has caught up with those dudes. But it's like, so I got into them just like maybe 10 years after they've been a band, 15 years after they've been a band, but then they proceeded to be a band, for another 10 or 15 years. So does that mean then that I'm late or early or so? I just figured they had a bunch of stuff out that was awesome and well regarded before I attached to them. And since then, 25 years have passed, 20 years have passed, and it's like I'm still a big fan. And with that, Dan, I totally shoehorned a bunch of stuff into that. So please take your time with your next,
all right,
your number 2 choice, please, pal.
I was actually going to shoehorn two in here together because they're bands that started around the same era that I remember being turned off of initially before just not even giving a chance to, for the same stupid reason, which was they're bands that got bad reviews and Heart Attack. When I used to use the zine Heart Attack as like a real like, a real like sort of, that was one of my main sources at the time. When I was like, say, in my early mid-20s of checking out
Ebullition Records is awesome, man.
Exactly. And there's like one of the two bands that I was going to kind of lump together, Ink and Dagger, sort of ties to Ebullition and
cool
a record that well, they were two of the members of that band, Sean McCabe and Don DeVore, also played in Frail, who had a song on the Ebullition XXX compilation that I talked about on the last episode. And I loved Frail. I thought they were great. And they were one of, there was a window of time where they were one of my favorite bands in that sort of like very specific little subgenre of hardcore or whatever. And then when I heard their new band wore makeup and sang about being vampires, I was just like, I don't know. And I didn't really take the up. It was a time when music wasn't just like readily available everywhere. And I was just like, I could only afford to buy so many records at a time. And I was like, I don't know if I'm going to check out the makeup vampire keyboard band. And then Sean McCabe kind of he's one of these people that if the internet had existed in the way it is now when if he was sort of doing the things he did when the internet existed now, he would probably be like just an evil TikTok star or something, because he would do things like show up at an Earth Crisis concert in a fur coat and pelt them with yogurt when they started playing, and just things like that. There's a song by the band Reversal of Man called "Get the Kids with the Sideburns." That's about the dudes from Earth Crisis trying to beat up one of the guys from Reversal of Man because they thought he was one of the guys from Ink and Dagger, because Sean McCabe had just done this like fur coat. He had just showed up at one of their shows in a fur coat and started throwing yogurt on them while they're this like, angry vegan band or whatever.
It's like performance art on crack, I suppose.
Exactly. But at a time when it's just like that you would hear somebody, it was like somebody's third hand recollection of that in a zine or something. And if you were lucky, like somebody caught one performance on tape and they were selling the VHS in like the classified section of Maximum Rock and Roll or something like that. Like it was just, like right now I can watch like Ink and Dagger videos like from like the entire brief span of their career, and like one of their first bass player went on to be like a fairly famous comedian, Eric Wareheim, of the duo Tim and Eric from the show Tim and Eric, Awesome Show, Great Job. And Tim and Eric's $1 Million Movie. Eric Wareheim, he also played in another band called was it Elements of Need? Yeah, who was like part of that whole like Ebullition Heart Attack scene back in the day.
I think we got to do a show about comedians who do punk music, because
there was a huge crossover there for sure. I've been watching the show.
About like the dudes from Portlandia, like that friggin', you know who I mean. They're both involved in music. Those dudes.
There's actually, on that note, there's a show you should check out called This Fool. If you have access to Disney Plus, it's on Disney Plus and their Star channel. That it's a stand-up comic named Chris Estrada, who's from South Central LA, but he's like an old hardcore scene dude. And it's just like the Leonardo, you just like the joke I've heard about the show is it's all their audience is just all like old punk dudes doing like the Leonardo DiCaprio like pointing meme at like whatever shirt Chris Estrada is. Like he's worn like Los Crudos shirts on the show, and like invited the members of the band to like come to his comedy shows for free and that kind of thing, and like all these other like like flyers for his comedy shows are like takeoffs on like old punk records and stuff like that. This is something I could talk about for a while. But anyways, to get back to it,
could be, man. Yeah.
Oh yeah. This is definitely something for another show. But get back to Ink and Dagger. Like I said, they were only around for like 3-4 years. Sean McCabe passed away in 2000. Like they started in 1996. Sean McCabe passed away in 2000. And I think they had like maybe one posthumous release after that, just a couple of 7-inches. But like I said, I didn't check them out till like years after. It's like I heard about them and I was just like, I don't know about the Vampire Keyboard Band. And just, you know, now like the show, their record shoved the 7-inch stake through my Philadelphia heart is like just like a really great little punk rock EP. And it's like, you can tell that they're starting, you know, they're learning more about like rock and roll and different sort of dynamics rather than just like loud, heavy, screamy and acoustic part. And, you know, if they'd kept going, who knows? But like, yeah, they're like 2 or 3 records that they did put out they're available on streaming. I'm sure you can, I know a few of them have been repressed a couple of different times, so you might be able to find them reasonably priced out there somewhere. Yeah. So Ink and Dagger were on there. And another band that I remember not checking out until their singer passed away, unfortunately, a couple of years ago, who I remember reading a bad review of their first album in that era, and just like, they were just not on my radar after that. And that is the World Inferno Friendship Society. I don't know if you're familiar with them.
Not even a bit.
They're a New York, New Jersey based punk, soul, klezmer, jazz collective.
Klezmer.
Oh, yeah. No, this is like, the best way I could describe them is like, they're the band that plays the messy after party at the Anarchist Book Fair that features everybody from the school band. Like, they usually would have like, you know, sort of 8 to 10 members on stage, like a full horn section and like multiple percussionists on top of like your guitar, bass, drums.
Or like Broken Social Scene.
Kind of, yeah, but with more like their singer Jack Terrycloth kind of looks like John Waters without the mustache, and wears kind of like a lot of like big old loud suits. And yeah, has kind of like a crooner vibe. And yeah, like I said, it's very much like, you know, this is like the school band nerds who discovered Noam Chomsky. Cause like, you know, their song titles are things like Only Anarchists Are Pretty. But it's like, yeah, like this big crazy mix of, like I said, of like punk and klezmer and jazz and soul and like just, yeah, like you got a friend that plays a saxophone, they're probably on stage. Like, yeah, you know, right? Yeah, this is where the nerds get a chance to like hang out with the punks, like one of those kind of bands. And yeah, their debut album came out on Gurn Bladston Records, which was a label run by Charles Maggio from the band Rorschach. And they normally released stuff that was like a little louder, heavier side of thing. And, you know, and then when they released like this weird, yeah, like I said, this weird art jazz soul collective's first record, like I remember it getting panned pretty hard, like, you know, by whatever fucking straight edge kid from Goleta, California, ended up getting stuck writing that review for Heart Attack, and just kind of being like, okay, sure, whatever. And then, yeah, like I said, you know, there's a lot of things out there to listen to, and they just weren't really a band that came, like I heard them mentioned here and there. But then, yeah, like I said, a couple years ago, the singer Jack Terrycloth passed away, I believe from cancer or something, like, you know, an extended illness, one of those sort of situations. And, you know, I heard a lot of people kind of lamenting them, even though, you know, like a friend of mine described them as like, you know, Disney villain music. Like that kind of, like, it can be pretty melodramatic at times. Like, and like I said, the lyrics are kind of like a mix of just kind of like, you know, I guess it's sort of anarcho-syndicalist theory and sort of jokes about getting drunk at the beach in New Jersey, or, you know, like, yeah, and just like I said, a real all over the place mix of like a bunch of different musical styles, but still, I recommend their album Red Eyed Soul from 2005. Like, awesome. You could see them. Awesome title. Like, yeah, like I feel like they were kind of adjacent to that whole folk punk scene that just kind of wasn't my thing. You know, like, just like I said, like I feel like they played a lot of anarchist book fairs, like that kind of band. But like I said, yeah. Hey, I've been to a keg party at the AK Press office. I got to hang out in line with Michael Parenti while waiting for vegan burgers and very cheap beer.
I think that's where people who would go with that, like, would pretend to be vegan because it would enhance their cachet.
Well,
You know,
they were only serving vegan burgers at the AK press party.
you don't even have a choice.
I was staying with an artist friend in Oakland at the time, and I think he'd done some design for them or something, and got invited to this cake party. That was
so that was like the same era. Yeah, I think of that as like one side of it, and then I think of the guys at Vice doing cocaine.
Yeah, exactly. These are like, like it was a lot of like, we're sipping beer next to these books that someone's definitely going to buy.
Yeah.
Like Vice is, that's a whole other world. But anyways, the World Inferno Friendship Society are definitely the sort of band that provided the soundtrack to a lot of those sorts of gatherings with those sorts of, sort of collective publishing endeavors or whatever. And I unfortunately never really gave them a shot until their singer passed away, and I saw a lot of people whose taste I respected sort of lamenting it. So I figured, hey, worth checking out. He also, back into the late 80s, early 90s, played in a pretty good kind of more straight ahead melodic punk band called Sticks and Stones, who had a couple of EPs that I think you could probably find rips of on YouTube somewhere. I don't know how in print any of them still are, but like I said, World Inferno Friendship Society, another band that I literally didn't check out until it was too late, unfortunately, but had been aware of for a while. And like one person's opinion kind of turned me away from, unfortunately, for too long. And that happens sometimes.
If 3 or 4 people download this, because I have no friggin' idea what our audience size is. I never any of the streams whatsoever. Only the YouTube video clip, which I understand most people don't even watch the video. The people who do engage with it is mostly through the audio. But my point is, Dan, is that now that if this conversation, and this is my like college teacher kind of deal, if just even 3 or 4 or 2 people that haven't heard of that before chase it down, and then they engage with it, and then it sort of, I don't mind. I enjoy that this is really just kind of like a fanzine format that we have going here, man. Like completely aspiring to be nothing other than that, really. You know what I mean?
Exactly. It's just sometimes it's fun to talk about music,
It's true. And I don't know, like the academic part of me, like sort of more the former academic part of me, but still. Part of me is like, I can scrape this. I can like take the transcripts, and I can take the, I can just contextualize it in such a way and present it as a text output such that could be suitable for not a self-published book, but maybe AK Press. There we go. See how I shoehorn that in? Except AK Press will have nothing to do with it, and nor should they. But just for instance, so that leading to perhaps I'm drinking coffee because I'm drinking. I got the Replacements box set.
Nice.
Which the reimagined, remastered, completely redone version of the Tim record from 1986. It's their first Warner record, their first mainstream record. And as per the thing, I'm not really in the position to shovel multiple hundreds of dollars at my record collection anymore, much to my chagrin. But I'm like, I'm going to get the enhanced bundle with the T-shirt and the mug and the pin and whatever, the 7-inch extra. So speaking of things, because I'm drinking coffee here with the hazelnut drink, and lo and behold, this leads us to the Descendants.
Nice.
Hypercapy and Spasnit from their kind of more recent years. But then what I love about the Descendants is, by design, you can listen to this, I Don't Want to Grow Up, Descendants, like they're decades apart, really. But I mean, like, I'll be damned if you put them on Spotify and mix them up. If I would be hard pressed to say.
Oh yeah.
And I realized I didn't know until this past while where I just completely overextended my money into a record collection. How much I really dig the Descendants. Don't you agree, Dan? Would you like to say a word to that, or?
Well, no, I was just sort of nodding in agreement, just in that. Yeah, the Descendants, they're one of those just like classic bands, and they're, that just sort of mixes, like they're just amazingly tight musicians for the style of music they do. Like that's one thing. Like there's pop punk bands, and then there's bands that are inspired by the Descendants. Those are the folks that just like they're they can stop on a dime, that kind of thing. Like they're
the characters and the narrative are so interesting with that group too.
Exactly.
I mean, like if you look at I went so far as to skim a Wikipedia article, because that's my level of here. And the fact that it wasn't that. It was like, the story, the history of the Descendants up until 2014 is available as video on Amazon Prime.
Yes, that documentary. I've been meaning to check that out.
I was watching that over the weekend, and that kind of got me onto it. And this is pretty, And I have one very specific memory, actually, which goes back to my late teenage years. I want to say I was about 17, and you were doing your show on CHSR, and I was getting blasted, teenage, hammered, drunk, and I called you on the show and said, Dan, can you play I'm Not a Loser by the Descendants? And I don't even know why that got stuck in my head. I think I'd heard it, on somebody's show or something.
Yeah.
The week before, and you were kind enough to do it. And man, I don't remember anything really from that evening except beyond when that came on. I was like, yeah. It was quite the teenage, righteously, unrighteous moment is what it was. So there we go, man. Late to the thing, and as much as I didn't realize really how rad they are.
Yeah.
And then there's that gap of separation, and then plus the singer, obviously, Milo, having a PhD in biopsychology. So he's
exactly
punk rock with PhDs, and we've talked about behind the scenes about maybe that's going to be an episode because we do one for whatever reason. Just it's like some people, you want to anyway. So Bad Religion, friggin' Greg Gaffin, obviously. Anyway, we're not going to go there.
Dillinger 4 as well.
What's
Another one to put on the Dillinger 4 as well. Their drummer is a psychologist. He's a doctor anyway. Yeah, but anyways. So back over.
And I guess that'll do for me for that. So how about you?
Okay, yeah. All right. So my next one is actually an artist that I know that I jumped on late. I jumped on too late, though I talked about one of the members of the group on the show previously, and this is the group Arm and Hammer, who is
Armed and Hammered.
No, not Armed and Hammered, not the long-running Toronto band Armed and Hammered. No, I'm talking about New York hip hop duo Arm and Hammer. Or Armand Hammer, which is features.
My hearing is getting old.
And it's one of those. And I feel like I thought it was just sort of but Armand, as like Armand is in the name Armand, and then Hammer, who's apparently an actual historical guy, but also New York bass duo of Elucid and Billy Woods, who I've talked about on the show before. His album Ethiops was one of my favorite albums of 2022. He's released 3 albums since then, since I talked about that one record on the show, because he's that prolific, and has been doing that for probably 10 to 15 years now, which is why he's someone that really on his own is hard to keep up with. But even Arm & Hammer, like they released a new album back in I think end of September called We Buy Diabetic Test Strips. It's been one of my favorite albums of the fall. That's just like a really weird, dark, experimental hip hop album. Like I've heard it described as like music for times when you know it's not going to be okay. And yeah, I've just been listening to them a bunch lately, and I finally went and looked at their other records and realized they have 8. This is their 8th full length as a group in like probably 9 or 10 years. That I'm just sort of it's like, yeah, on top of all of the solo, like I said, Billy Woods has put out 2 solo albums since the one I talked about on the show. Between the one I talked about on the show and this Arm & Hammer record, like the guy is just incredibly prolific, and it's not like throwaway. Like he's putting work into every song, obviously. Like it's not just like throwaway bullshit, like. And the this album, We Buy Diabetic Test Strips, that I've been listening to a bunch. Every track is produced by I think a different artist, pretty much. But it's like pretty much a who's who of who's dark and weird and electronic. Like JPEG Mafia did their first single for the album, which is called "Woke Up and Asked Siri How I'm Gonna Die." And LP, who I've talked about on the show, produced a really good song called "The Gods Must Be Crazy." Actually, I just got a little bit of back pay from work recently, and I bought some stupid band shirts because I'm an old man who likes to own stupid band shirts. And I got a company flow. I got a shirt that just this company flow shirt as part of my order of silly band shirts that showed up today. And anyway, so LP produced "The Gods Must Be Crazy" on the song, and there's another really good song called "Trauma Mike" that I was listening to a bunch. That has production by Pink Sifu and Moor Mother, who's like a Philadelphia-based noise artist, who is kind of like hanging around just like banging on scrap metal, like in part of this like weird dark rap song. It's a really like it's one of my favorite little pockets of a subgenre of the genre, and these guys kind of are doing it the best. It's like music made by people who were like, have been around for a while and like lived through some shit, but not trying to sensationalize any just sort of they have a lived experience that they talk about, and like it's like weird and dark, and like I said, talks about when times aren't necessarily going to be okay all the time, and it's a great album. And like I said, I've been listening to it so much, and then found out it's their 8th. So I've got a lot of homework to do in that end, let alone trying to keep up with Billy Woods' other stuff. But yeah, like I said, Arm & Hammer, We Buy Diabetic Test Strips. Whenever we talk about our favorites of the year, that's probably, and I actually listened to an interview with them recently where they're talking about like sort of learning about weird little like corners of the world and how people get by in them. That one of the I think it's Billy Woods was walking around one day and saw a sign in a corner store window that said "We Buy Diabetic Test Strips" with a phone number, and he was just like it kind of like just twisted his mind to like find out like what is this world like, and like had just called the number and like was like, hey, so what's the deal? Like I saw it, it's like like what's going on, and just like found out about, I guess people were recycling them or something, like found a way to recycle them and resell them or something. But it was just like, that's a thing that's happening now, and I learned about it because I saw a weird little sign, and like that's the kind of stuff that goes into it goes into their music and why I really like their stuff, So that was.
I just sometimes think like sometimes every day somebody's waking up somewhere, and the way that they're engaging with the world and their artistic thing is, I'm in a band, and we put out a thing called Diabetic Test Strips. What?
We Buy Diabetic Test Strips.
Yes,
it's named after, and it is taken from a sign that one of them saw in like a corner. Someone had put up like just like a handwritten sign in a corner store window.
Yeah, that's very specific and intentional. Like I'm engaging with the world through this musical thing, which is, it's like Like, I don't know. You wake up and you're in a band. You wake up and you're the bass player in the band Anal Cunt. Like, like.
I've actually seen them live.
You've seen Anal Cunt live?
Yes.
Was it mind blowing?
I saw them play 2 sets at the same festival in Providence, Rhode Island.
Wow.
The first one was an acoustic set the first night. Which
was,
it was just the guitarist and the singer. And what they did was the singer had an extra microphone between his knees and just played the drum parts on his knees while the guitar player played acoustic. And then the second night, the band that I was roadieing for at the time, just kind of like tagging along with while they were sort of cutting through part of New England on tour. This band from Atlanta, Georgia called Quadaliacha, who I met them in Buffalo, New York, because I helped them not get beaten up by another band that they played with that night who didn't like them. So we helped. Shout out to Will. I don't know if he would ever watch this or listen to this, but anyways, I helped them sneak out of this show in Buffalo without getting beaten up. So they took me the rest of the way to the coast so I could hitchhike from Boston up to Fredericton to stop on to visit back in like the year just after I moved away. But anyways, while I was roadieing for this band on tour after helping them not get beat up in Buffalo, they ended up playing this 3-day festival in Providence, Rhode Island. And they had not one, but 2 performances by Anal Cunt there. And they also headlined the third night and took all of the money from the door, apparently. It was just like a collection of the dumbest dudes alive. Very excited for them. We were just all like, me and the guys in Quadaliacha were all just sort of standing in the back of the room because like they'd been hanging out in the area for most of that weekend, just kind of like watching all the other friends' bands play and leave town again. And then they're like, well, I guess we're playing the last day. It should be good. And then it's the day that Anal Cunt are headlining. And it's just, it's just the dumbest dudes ever. All very excited to see them play the song Peppy the Gay Waiter. Like, it was just not a fun time. We ended up stealing a Texas Mickey from behind the bar and like just hightailing it out of there. It was just, it was a time. Anyways, that.
You've had some very seriously lived experiences in and around Anal Cunt.
Yes, that was my one experience.
Band that I've never listened to, but that's like, has.
That's I've never been a fan of theirs, but I just had this very intense experience with them one weekend in Providence, Rhode Island.
No, that's. I'm glad that we have a venue to capture this kind of thing. Right?
This was a long time ago. I think I was 20. It was the year after I moved away from Fredericton, so I think it would have been like 21 or something. And it was like
man,
taking my time on the way back and just kind of tagging along with various bands on tour and that kind of thing. During the brief window of time where I did that.
Worst ways to spend a few years. What the hell, right?
Exactly.
You didn't.
So, anyways, that was a couple of very extended side tirades.
Sure, man. The 'tis the season, right?
Yeah.
Of the sideways tirades. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, you know what? I'm just gonna take. I don't know. I think one of them I'll leave for the notes, and I'll shoehorn 2 of them together. And this is just because they came to me from the record label. It's Iodine Recording, Iodine Record. Yeah, they're kind of like they're a contemporary label, but they're putting out like older and less recognized or less heralded, I suppose, punk and emo. You want to say like like doing the circuit of KFC halls and basements and like whatever, right? And I have really come to appreciate that whole genre of music. So when I was still kind of able to leverage certain funding vehicles that I had at my disposal, where I'm like, I could just go directly to record labels, and even though it's murderous to get shipping from the United States, usually I'm still like, when can I do this again? Probably never. So what the hey? And I stand by that. So I'm recording artists, Smoker Fire.
Okay.
Yeah, and they're kind of a bit of a story here with them. My first instance of connecting to them is through the singer Joe McMahon, who I mentioned before on the show, in conjunction with Brendan Kelly from Lawrence Arms, who I just think he's a really singular talent within that scene.
Yeah.
Chicago-ish, whatever, them and Alkaline Trio and whatever. It's just some stuff I've been enjoying a lot lately. So this Joe McMahon, he put out the split second side of an acoustic split with Brendan Kelly, and that kind of got me curious enough to go, okay, well, what was this guy even in? And he was in a band, I don't even know, it was like Jericho. It was like some like religious-ish kind of thing, and they had to change the name a couple times. They started out. It was like they started out in like Boston as part of the mid '90s kind of Northeast punk scene, but then they went down to Virginia, and they sort of switched into what ultimately morphed out as Smoker Fire. And this is all to say I had no reason to know about it except, it was obscure enough, but then it's actually really dope, as it turns out. And, it's just a solid, it's very much of the time. It's very much of the era. It's, like I said, just anything that, there's just such a wide, vast amount of those bands, right? And what I appreciate about like on Instagram, I know you follow some of them too, is just like 90s hardcore.
Or, all those accounts,
Yeah, all of those accounts. I just follow them. It's just like shitloads of bands I'm never gonna even know existed. But every time I hear one of them kind of picks up, it's like, oh, Suicide Machines. Okay, this is or whatever. Just something obscure. It's so I appreciate the Zuckerberg suckbox. The Zuckerberg suckbox. I think I can TM that. For that aspect of getting hip to some of this stuff. And the last thing I'll add to it is they were so nice. The record labels sometimes are so nice about it because they're like, man, it sucks you have to pay that much for shipping, so they'll just flip you in a free record sometimes.
Yeah.
And Orange Island is a band who, well, heck, if you're in Orange Island and you want to let me know anything about you because you're almost non-existent, as far as being on the internet, or maybe I'm just not looking hard enough. But it's got some really, it's just a beautiful record. One Night Stay, and it's got this decrepit looking, hotel room with a phone on it that's totally getting distorted by the filter here. But it's that level of lyrical, almost with literary aspirations, almost, but it's still just hardcore, right? So for me, with my friggin' English degree and my friggin' pathological need to write in public, I go when somebody else is kind of making similar aspirations, I go, okay, well played. So I guess I'll just leave it at that. What's your last one?
All right. Yeah, my last one's an artist who I guess I was exposed to a little bit early, but I didn't really know what I was listening to at the time. And then didn't catch up on until later. And that is Memphis's Jay Reatard. Formerly Jimmy Lee Lindsay, or I guess sort of his government name was Jimmy Lee Lindsay. But I had originally heard his old band, The Lost Sounds, through our mutual friend, Ben McFarlane, just as one of those many things Ben had that was just like, the guy just has, it was during that time, during a period of time, I was like, I think it was like visiting Fredericton. And
he had a prodigious record collection.
He did. He just had exactly. And it was just like constantly growing, it seems. And I was just like over visiting him, and it was one of like half a dozen things he would have played me that day. That just kind of like, okay, kind of
I like
spooky
the
garagey thing.
I'll be honest.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I remember when Ben first started hanging around CHSR when he was younger, and he just pretty much would like just interrogate people about certain records and just like absorb that information until later on he had the opportunity to just build like the ultimate record collection, it seemed, for like what he was into at the time. Or that's, you know, just like he was the person that seemed to know where to get the goods, you know, like where to find the good stuff for a lot of that. And yeah, he was one of maybe a half a dozen artists who would have played me some one afternoon that I heard and then didn't really know where to keep up with. And then like there was a stretch of time in the aughts where I wasn't really keeping up with the scene so much. Like I worked in the hospitality industry, shall we say, in like a pretty square like bar restaurant kind of situation.
And like, can you do worse than that?
Exactly. Well, this was this was an Irish pub. I got real familiar with the song Sonny's Dream, shall we say, and like I was dating like a lady hip hop DJ at the time and mostly just listened to that kind of stuff. And it was like that. If it wasn't like that or like some weird doomy post metal kind of like Neurosis ripoff thing, I probably wasn't listening to it. And that was around the time that he was really sort of releasing a lot of his iconic records. And like he even came to Halifax while I was living here, and I probably worked 65 hours that week, you know, at the Old Triangle or whatever. It was just like, I'm not going to that fucking festival.
The Old Triangle.
Yeah, no, I was a doorman and also line cook at the same time at the Old Triangle for in Halifax for quite a few years. That was my inspiration for getting into the world of sit down jobs in the public service.
Well played.
Was a few years doing that. A few years working technically 2 jobs at the same establishment. And yeah, that led to some long weeks and just kind of like not really. It's like I didn't really get out to a lot of shows at the time, and you know, I listened to what I listened to. And you know, if it was something that I think I just thought of it like some Vice magazine stuff or whatever at the time and didn't really like clue in. And then, you know, probably right around the time he passed away, I would have finally given him a chance. It was probably around the time that I think that was around the time I finally listened to him, was right around the time he unfortunately passed away, like in the late aughts or whatever. But still, like, you know, I can throw out Blood Visions and it's like, that's still a killer album, you know, like it's like he only put out like a couple of solo records that are still like, you know, very worth listening to. And like, you know, the stuff with the Lost Sounds, which was his old band that like Ben McFarlane played me, like that stuff. I know you can find most of their stuff on streaming as well. And it's kind of like, it's almost like the same vibe as like the Murder City Devils. I don't know if you ever listened to them back in the day, like that kind of like, yeah, you know, spooky garagey stuff, but like coming from him and his like pop songwriting chops. And yeah, like I said, I just didn't keep up with that. I wasn't keeping up with that stuff for a bit, and unfortunately missed out on opportunities to like sort of check him out in the, you know, while he was active more actively because of that. But, you know, definitely enjoyed his music sort of later on. So that was my last pick.
Fantastic. Well, I think we covered a whole pile of ground there, and I quite enjoyed some of these side tracks that we find ourselves on, which I've had this experience on the other podcast as well. You see, and I'll just take the moment to remark, because I'm marked on the other one, where these two things that I do are just so quite different from each other, but it's like the same production process, and it's a similar vibe, except just in a totally different area. So I've just completed a year in with the other one, and we have, you know, in a month or two, we're going to be on 1 full year of this. Ooh. So if you actually take the number of podcast episodes that have come out, by that point, we're going to be at probably number 17 or 18 within a year. You know, we're going to get 2 or 3 more of these in within a couple months for sure. Yep. Even though we tend to give ourselves lots of slack, as we ought to, as we coach. But then with the other one, it's like by that point it'll be up to almost like episode 40, you know, and it'll just be, I don't know. I think it's impressive, Dan. I think we're coming up with something for the record here. And I just like to take this, call it a Halloween moment of gratitude. Just say, thank you for being a friend. Travel down the road and back again. Your heart is true. You're a pal and a companion. And if you threw a party, and I think you know the rest, I won't go further with that. That's my Halloween wish for anybody who's listening to this. Thank you for not murdering me in my sleep with a nice stick. All right, that's my final last word.
Okay, thanks, Matt. That was really nice. I don't know. I really appreciate that. That's really nice. I've really enjoyed this too. It's been really great.
Good.
Like I said, like you said, we do sort of take our time between these sometimes because I mean, I don't know, life happens.
You got to be human first.
Exactly, but it's really, like I said, it's sometimes fun to just like sit and talk about music for a while, and like just kind of like because there's stuff that you talk about that I haven't really listened to that I always check out afterwards, and like I like just like.
I like I like the notes. I like reading what you say about it, and then I like I like the fact that this exists in like a few different distinct formats. It just does my little AV, high school nerd heart, a certain amount of like, you can kind of go, that's kind of somewhat of a normal trajectory under the circumstances. Stop, at the CHSR, flail a little bit in your middle years, and then, a podcast, do tell. Like, got to lean into those stereotypes, man. We got to do it.
All right.
All right. So, take care, everybody. Bye for now.
Bye.